food shop session. So good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on which time zone you're in. The format is currently on your screen. We will be having 4 discussions this morning or this afternoon. Each presentation will last 10 minutes, have a 1-minute pause, and then we will have a 10-minute coffee and or bathroom break, after which discussion of all presentations will take place. Our first presenter is Damion Dooley of the University of British Columbia. The title of the presentation is FoodOn Evolution in the Food Ontology Ecosystem. Damion is an ontology in the Hsiao Health Bioinformatics Labs in Vancouver, British Columbia. After an ancient cognitive science degree and 2 decades of leading internet startups app developments, Damion became an ontology love affair 6 years ago while working on a Canadian RIDA patented bioinformatics web platform. He is active in OBO Foundry and Ontology for Biomedical Investigation Operation, and leads the genomic epidemiology and FoodOn ontologies. Damion, would you share your screen and start your presentation?
Sure, great. Oh, wrong one. Just a sec. And one other thing, while I'm presenting, if audio is a problem, let me know. And already I'm needing to find the share button. Okay, here we go. Okay, yes, so thanks for the introduction, Robert. So I work out of the Hsiao Public Health Bioinformatics Lab in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I have a few people to thank for supporting us, SFU, Simon Fraser University, U.S. Department of Agriculture, University of British Columbia, and Genome Canada, as well as our lab mates who are helping with curation of FoodOn and recent contributors. I'm here to talk about FoodOn and the evolution of this ontology in the last few years, especially within this food ontology ecosystem that's coming up in the OBO Foundry family of ontologies. So I'll talk about how FoodOn began, the kind of vocabulary that we started needing in public health, and the OBO Foundry curation community that's supporting that. And I'll touch on a food product example and some tools and agency projects that FoodOn is involved in. So at the lab, Hsiao Lab, we're involved in public health. More specifically, we started out in infectious disease, foodborne pathogens, and sequencing. And in that whole realm, the activity is investigating outbreaks. And this 2011 E. coli one was quite predominant in that way. Started in Germany. May 1st, there was a real difficulty trying to figure out where this pathogen was located in the food system. So it took actually over 3 weeks, up to a month, I think, and the whole epidemic lasted for 2 months to locate the food sources. 4,000 people were ill, 47 fatalities. It ended up being pinpointed to Egyptian fenugreek seeds, possibly one single shipment. So obviously the fast and accurate detection of pathogens is critical, but the data problem around the language between the different agencies that are needing to trade information to do the trace forward and trace back is a real problem. This is exemplified by the interview forms that different public health agencies have. Here we're looking at the CDC Atlanta interview forms that look at people who've come in contact with risky food, with foodborne outbreak, what kind of disease, hospitalization, date and time, all the who, what, where, whens of an investigation, and this food, food descriptions. What did you eat? Was it preserved, unrefrigerated? And are samples available? So all of this food vocabulary is needed across agencies, and the interview sheets are really very similar between the BC CDC, the WHO, and other agencies. So that's just to frame the problem. What we wanted to do was look at any existing vocabulary that could be brought into the ontology world to support this. And we ended up deciding on languel, which was a vocabulary that actually stretches all the way back to 1975. It's a food description vocabulary that allows food database indexers to describe plates of food or what's on them, dishes, and in order to pair up with nutritional information. So we took languel, brought it in, and its 14 facets to describe food, brought it into an ontology, FoodOn, and we also at the same time wanted to reuse ontology vocabulary for taxonomy, anatomy, and other descriptors, chemistry. And so we turned to OboFoundry, the family of ontologies, for that. And each of these ontologies is attempted to be orthogonal in terms of vocabulary, reusing each other's terms. It's called the Muriel principle. And that's important in order to not reinvent the wheel when we're using this. So what that ends up being for FoodOn is that you can take a look at a food product and look at each of the facets to describe it. And with those facets, find that some terms are from FoodOn itself for the product name, but others are already created by other ontologies. So NCBI taxon is for the plant or animal food source. The anatomy part, leg, stem, leaf, seed, is covered by plant anatomy, plant ontology, and the Oberon anatomy. The relations ontology and takes care of food processes like preserved, cooked, and Paedo takes care of other facets like color of food, texture. This enables us to have a bag of terms to describe a product like organic mashed potatoes, organic mashed carrot baby food, jarred, and name off that a jar is part of this product, organic label is involved, the product name is carrot strained baby food, and the plant is carrot plant, and so on. But ontologies go a step further. It's not just a bag of terms that we get out of this. We can actually create a model for the food product. So we can point to a consumer of the food or a set of consumers, the kinds of quality of that food, what plant and animal taxonomy that derives from, the parts possibly, and the processes involved in creating it. So that fulfilled our mission for the epidemiology side in terms of investigations of foodborne outbreaks. And we launched FoodOn about 3 years ago. Since then, a bunch of other ontologies have popped up, and that's what this whole workshop is about. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about the other ontologies, a number of which use FoodOn product names or plant and animal source, and talk about the nutritional components, more of a research focus. FOBI, food biomarker ontology, FIDEA, food interactions with drugs, crop dietary nutrition ontology, and so on. So they're all using the OboFoundry family of ontologies, the base layer for taxonomy, chemistry, anatomy, environment, along with FoodOn. So in this work, we've just been looking at basic food patterns, and this is sort of the interface from the harvested world into productizing food. And that means being able to look at sample of a food anywhere along the product chain and identify what organism it came from and what part of the plant or animal. This is a bit more focused on post-harvest when you haven't done any more subsequent processing. At the very least, we can say a sample comes from this food if it's a single ingredient. So here's an example. An apple whole is a palm fruit. That's the anatomical part, and it derives from Malus domestica. We can further specialize that into a Fuji apple from a Fuji apple tree. So the other thing that happens then is you move on from just having a whole apple. You get to start talking about other states of that apple. Here it's raw. Here it's sliced, and there are processes involved. So this brings us to FoodOn development. What are we doing? We are at 28,500 terms, and there's a breakdown here of them all. I can say that on the chemical food component, we are bringing in USDA and InFoods and nutrients, complements of all the work that the crop dietary nutrition ontology is doing just now. We're going to consolidate some organisms. There's some repetition there between the NCBI taxonomy organisms and the ones that FoodOn mentions. We are creating that pattern we just saw on the last slide for organism times part to create entities for that.
1 minute.
And bringing Wikipedia definitions and enhanced the process branch, mapping agency foods. And that is a list of agency projects that we're involved in now. So just to wrap up, there are some tools and visualization tools that we're going to be making available for FoodOn. So thanks. And I'll stop sharing now.
All right. Our next presentation is titled The Crop Dietary Nutrition Ontology, Aligning the Domains for Production and Consumption, presented by Liliana Andrés from, from Southern Cross University in Australia. Liliana Andrés is a PhD candidate under the supervision of Professor Graham King. She has a BA in biology and an MA in plant biology from the National Library of Genomics for Biodiversity, Mexico, and previously worked as a bioinformatician in the private sector. For her PhD project, Knowledge Representation and Database Integration to facilitate analysis and development of underutilized crop plants, Lilian has immersed herself in the world of standardization and harmonization of data to bridge the domains of crop science and nutrition. Earlier this year, she published a review paper in Crop Science, has co-authored another, and has a paper under review focused on fair compliance of trail data. Lilian, would you take over?
Yep. So just to be sure, you can see the first slide, right?
We can see it perfectly.
Okay, that's good. Hi, my name is Liliana Andrés, and today I will be presenting my PhD project. My supervisors are Professor Graham King and Dr. Ramil Mavlian. The title of my talk is The Crop Dietary Nutrition Ontology, Aligning the Domains of Production and Consumption. And I would like to start mentioning that meeting the challenge of nutritional security requires ongoing innovation, particularly in managing dietary nutritional information for pre-breeding analysis, selection, and cultivation of specific food crops and crop plant varieties or cultivars. At present, the ability to compare nutritional value from different crops is limited, with data management systems for most crops often inconsistent and poorly integrated, as well as limited data standardization and interoperability. So if a dietitian wants to compare two cultivars to know which cultivar contains more protein, or if a plant breeder is interested in knowing the nutritional value of specific cultivars, they may face some issues accessing, reusing, or navigating nutritional information across different servers, databases, or spreadsheets. So this issue exists because the dietary nutritional data have been deposited in different databases, spreadsheets, and publications, including also supplementary data. So that is often inconsistent and poorly integrated. Some of these resources or sources involve the Food Data Central, the inputs from FAO, which not include variation within the species, and they are not cultivar specific, and the key micronutrients are often underreported. So actually, innovative strategies for the management of dietary nutritional information in crop plants are required. So we could say, no problem, let's use an existing ontology to associate and access the existing nutritional information. However, we found that just few ontologies provide comprehensive representation of dietary nutritional information, and most of them do not appear efficiently managed, updated, or easily accessible. Also, some other ontologies lack of specificity in the tailored subclassification of terms within classes, or on the opposite, they also present an exhaustive level of granularity, such as KEVI, which contains around 140,000 terms associated with molecular entities and biosynthesis, which is actually great. We actually want that exhaustive level of granularity, but there is actually more information on that, what is required for dietitians and breeders. So although KEVI contains an exhaustive level of granularity across the classification of the chemical compounds, as we can see, for example, in this image, it represents a starting point to map or reuse semantically equivalent chemical or nutritional compounds to represent the existing dietary nutrition information. So for this reason, we have proposed the development of the crop dietary nutritional ontology, or CDNO. So the CDNO has been initially designed with three major classes, which is the dietary nutritional component, dietary function, and analytical method. With these specific classes, it is expected to generate a formal human and machine-readable control vocabulary to navigate crop-related nutritional information. So today, I'm just going to talk about the dietary nutritional component class, which will be developed by reusing different data sources and databases, for example, inputs, Food Data Central, different literature as well. But one of the most important is in developing the CDNO will be the crop dietary nutrition data framework. So what is this framework? So the CDN-DF is a branch tree hierarchy created by Azman Halimi in 2019. So this framework has been updated in version 2 with terms from Food Data Central, mainly at the moment, containing now 478 dietary nutritional components. And so this hierarchy has been considered for the main design of the CDNO, reusing the classification of dietary nutritional components. Also, it is important to mention that the CDNDF is the only source with semantic equivalent associations to KEBI. So that's actually really helpful for us in the development of the CDNO. So also because the CDNO is representing knowledge from crop to diet, it requires not only the reuse of chemical entities from KEBI, but the reuse of other existing ontology terms. For this reason, we are providing concepts that can be adopted by FoodOn, representing knowledge related to harvested products. So for example, we can say that cereal grain being harvested from wheat, or a soy grain harvest from soybean. So at the moment, 58 terminologies related to crops with their harvested products are being integrated by the FoodOn team. And so following an axiom provided by the PhD student, Kai Blomberg, member of the ENVO team, the CDNO axiom looks mostly like this. So where the concentration of terminology, it's taken from the Baten ontology. And in here is in some KEBI or KEBI glucose that is taken from the KEBI ontology. In the seed, and seed is taken from the plant ontology, derived from Bambara groundnut. And this specific term will be also associated to the NCBI taxon or an NCBI taxon ID. So in this way, we will have all the terminologies cross-referenced. So the development of the CDNO is still in progress, but we are expecting to release the OWL file at the end of December. So the CDNO will then be associated to real data initially in CropStoreDB, a database that contains information related to phenotypic quality traits and nutritional information. But this will be for the reuse as well of plant breeders, researchers, nutritionists, and dietitians. So I just would like to thank my supervisors and collaborators for their inputs and also the time invested in this project, and to all of you for your time and maybe questions or interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. We will not be taking questions at this time, but we will do so in the afternoon after all the presentations.
Yep.
Our next talk is titled "The Plant Trait Ontology Links Wheat Traits for Crop Improvements and Genomics" by Laurel Cooper. Laurel is the project coordinator and scientific curator with the Plant Genome Project, formerly the Plant Ontology Project, working primarily on developing reference ontologies for plant science and comparative bioinformatic analyses. Laurel joined the Grain Genes database team in August 2019 as a half-time curator, bringing considerable experience in the many facets of curation, and is working closely with the Grain Genes team to curate the wheat gene catalog into the Grain Gene database. Today, Laurel will show us how the plant trait ontology from the Planting Project facilitates data integration by linking plant genomics data at the Planting with traits data at Grain Gene and the specific grain crop ontology. Laura?
Great, thank you very much. And good morning, everyone from Smoky, Oregon. Can you see my first slide?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm not going to repeat the title because we've already seen that. So the goals of the Plantium project, I thought it'd be helpful to restate these. The Plantium, we aim to develop and maintain a network of reference ontologies for plants, which link plant traits, phenotypes, gene expression, genomes, genetic diversity data from a very wide range of plant species. And today I'm going to be mostly focusing on wheat, but I want to highlight the fact that we do cover about 125 different plant species. And our goal is to align our reference ontologies with descriptors from species-specific vocabularies, which are useful for the breeding community. And this way we can link the genomics data with the breeding data. And our goal is to create mappings which are links to other ontologies and databases. So we're just in the process of doing a new release for the Plantium, release version 4.0. And in this release, we have three basic reference ontologies developed by the Plantium for the plant ontology, which has already been mentioned here, the plant trait ontology, the TO, for the plant experimental conditions ontology, which is useful for describing experimental data. And we also host 11 species-specific crop ontologies developed by the Crop Ontology Project with Elizabeth Arno. And they're listed here: cassava, lentil, maize, pigeon pea, potato, rice, sorghum, soybean, sweet potato, wheat, and yam. And so these are bringing in breeder traits and breeder variables that they're interested in using in their breeding programs. And we host a large amount of annotation data. We have about almost 20 million ontology-based annotations to about 3.1 million data objects, which are mostly genes and gene products, germplasm sources, and some QTLs and mutant data. So as I mentioned, this covers more than, I think, about 124, 125 taxa, and we're pulling that data in from about 30 database sources. And the Plantium ontologies are used by approximately more than 40 major plant biology resources worldwide. So it's been widely adopted. This diagram shows a diagram of the suite of reference ontologies hosted at the Plantium. And you can see the yellow ones are ontologies developed in-house by the Plantium project. The blue ones are partner ontologies, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, the Go and Heavy, which Liliana mentioned. And this also sort of shows you the scope of the reference ontologies. Sorry. So it runs from a very broad granularity with the experimental conditions and ENVO down to single molecule. So the plant trait ontology consists of 9 upper level categories, which encompasses a wide variety of traits that you'll find in plants. Everything from biochemical traits, biological processes, morphology, sterility or fertility, yield, which of course is very important in crops, plant qualities, and also abiotic and biotic stresses. So the plant ontology the plant trait ontology has about 1,600 terms with links to about 165,000 data objects in Plantium. So one of the things that the plant trait ontology does is it links common types of data from various species, because in the plant world, you can see that these are all 6 of these are examples of fruit color traits across various species, and they all have different terminologies and different names that are in use in the literature and so on. So by annotating these all with our TO term for fruit color trait, we can gather that information and make comparisons across different species and investigate all these different kinds of data types. So these annotations are very important. So in addition to the reference ontologies, as I mentioned, we have 11 species-specific ontologies developed by the Crop Ontology from the CGIAR centers around the world. And this is just an example of 3 of them. The wheat ontology was developed at Sept, and there's been recently some input from the T3 project on the wheat ontology, which was really helpful. And with my new role at Grain Genes, I've been adding more terms to more terms to the ontology to describe traits that we're using in QTLs and so on. And so this is the wheat at Sept, lentils were developed down at Carta, and the rice ontology from Erie. And you can see each of them, there's a few examples and some numbers of the data. So the question is, with these species-specific ontologies, how can we make these interspecific comparisons across these ontologies and make this data accessible to everyone from breeders to scientists working on comparative genomics projects? So the way this is done is we map these CO terms to the trait ontology terms using the design patterns which are integrated into the ontologies. And so this slide shows an example of a mapping between two terms, one from the CO, one from the wheat CO, and one from the TO, where when on first glance, especially if you're a computer, wouldn't realize that the wheat spike is an inflorescence and that the wheat spike length is the same as an inflorescence length, a more specific category of it. But the reasoner can use the design patterns, and within this term, within the CO term, the design pattern is the PO term for inflorescence spike, and then the PATO term for length, and the reasoner can identify that these are the same and map these. So a lot of this work was done by Marie-Angelique Laporte with the crop ontology, and she's now with the Sept Biodiversity International Alliance. And so this slide shows an example of 4 of the crop ontologies with their plant height term mapped to the TO plant height. And so you can see in our hierarchy, if data is annotated to these more specific terms, that data can be aggregated under the TO term, and it's useful for making cross-species comparisons and comparative genomics inquiries. And this just gives a little example. This hierarchy here is the TO hierarchy, and it shows how it interacts with PATO and with the PO through the relationships of ISA and PARTIV and so on. So, yeah. So also with the new integration with Grain Genes is very exciting, because Grain Genes is an integrated relational database and internet resource for the international small grains community, and provides a large amount of curated genomic and genetic information about Tertiaceae species. And I took a little screenshot there so you can see the front page, and we welcome people to come and visit the database. Grain Genes hosts a diversity of data types, including genome browsers, comparative linkage maps, sequence polymorphisms, and QTLs. So you can see that the data at Grain Genes is different than a lot of what we cover at Plantiome. So it's very complementary. And I just put a citation down here for Victoria Blake, who's one of the main curators. She has a recent paper on the Grain Genes database in Database last year. So one of the examples, I want to show you an example of how we're annotating trait data at Grain Genes and integrating it with Plantiome and with the CO terms. So currently Grain Genes has about 386 traits that are described. About 246 of those are currently mapped to TO terms, and about 72 are also mapped to CO terms. And these links back to the Plantiome database so that you can visualize the data there and go and look and see what we have in comparison. So here's another example. This is a reaction to stem rust term, and you can see this is mapped to the Plantiome fungal disease resistance term, and also to the CO wheat stem rust response trait. So we have a number of tools that are available for collaboration. All of our ontologies, including the crop-specific ontologies, are available on our GitHub, and we welcome you to come and request terms or make suggestions. So we encourage community feedback and try to address it as quickly as we can. So we encourage how you can get involved, explore the annotations and ontologies. If you don't have a GitHub account, we encourage people to get a GitHub account and come and visit us. annotate your data and work with us to submit your data to our repository. And here's a recent publication from NAR last year on the
1 minute.
Okay, I'm just wrapping up. Yep. So I just want to acknowledge a lot of partners who have been involved in this. The Plantiome is quite a large multinational project with folks around the world. The main PI is Pankaj Jaiswal at Oregon State University, and I work in his lab. We have a number of other collaborators at Lawrence Berkeley, New York Botanic Garden, University of Buffalo, UK. And we also work very closely with Elizabeth Arnaud and her team at Bioversity, and especially Marie-Angelique Laporte. And some of the folks from CIMMYT, such as Rosemary, were involved with developing the wheat trait dictionary. And at Green Genes, the lead PI at Green Genes is Tanner Sen, and the other lead curator that works really closely with me is Vic Carella Blake. So, and I just want to acknowledge the funding from NSF. So thank you very much. And I'll stop sharing now.
Apologies, this is annoying. Our next presentation is the Agronomy Ontology, a semantic layer to standardize agronomic data in farming system research and development by Céline Aubert. Céline Aubert is an agronomist working with the CGIAR for the past 7 years. She is the project coordinators of AgroFIMS, a tool to create agronomic field books, and one of the 2 developers and curators of the Agronomy Ontology. Céline, we can see your slides.
Perfect. Thank you, Robert, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. So I will talk about the Agronomy Ontology. And first, let me give you some background of the context in which we developed this ontology. So the Agronomy Ontology has been built within the platform for big data in agriculture. It's one of the multi-center projects of the CGIAR. And this all started with questions arising from researchers on how to improve agriculture in regions where they were working. To help the researcher answer these questions, Guardians has been built, and Guardian is a tool to discover agricultural data and publications across CGIAR centers and other institutions, like the one you can see. And so researcher could find, explore, and even analyze data sets, and eventually share their own data sets. But when we started to look in detail at the data sets we could find in Guardians, we realized there were some discrepancies. So I will show you one of the data sets we were able to find in Guardians. So if you look in detail to this one, you can wonder what are these 2 empty columns, what these codes mean, and if you scroll at the end, this 8,000 data set, the language even is changing. So even though researchers could find the data, they could not really use it. And the question became how to use the data without spending months trying to understand it. So basically how to get and how to make data fair. So to solve this issue, we started to create a suite of tools within the big data platform. Is Guardian as a centerpiece. Then we built Griffiths. It's a web application that helps agronomists create fields that integrate semantics. So people can go in the field, collect data, and this data are already annotated using ontologies. But to make this all working, we needed to integrate ontology within those tools. So when we started to develop the Agronomy Ontology, there were already a lot of ontologies covering agronomic terms, like the soils from ENVO or the chemicals from K, but there were big gaps in terms on how to describe the term. And those information is critical to reuse the data, because if you don't know how the experiment has been laid out in the field, how the crop has been grown, you may misinterpret part of the data. So that's why we created the Agronomy Ontology, to provide the semantics needed to describe agricultural trial from the experimental condition to the agronomic practices, and also including implements, input, and crop measurements. So of course, we did not wanted to reinvent the wheel. So we started to look at what was already existing, and we gathered terms that exist in other ontologies. So here you can see the list of ontology we are importing terms from. So for example, we are using terms from ENVO, like the soil or everything related to the environment of the experiment. We also use KB to describe fertilizer. From ENVO, we import food products that are also used as fertilizer. We also use patho terms to create variables like the length, the weight. And to describe the plant, we use plant ontology, trait ontology that Laurel just described, and also the crop ontology. So after gathering external terms, we focus on our efforts on describing terms that are specific to the agronomy ontology and that were not existing in those ontologies. So the entry point of agro is the agricultural experimental plot. So this plot can be either an entire field or just a part of this field. But basically, it's where the experiment is taking place. And this class plot is linked to different concepts, like the variables that can be measured on that plot. So here we have the plot length, the plot width, the plot area. And then on this plot, activities will happen. So here, for example, we have a planting process. So basically, it's what the farmer or the researcher is doing on this field. And for that kind of activities, we have built a second type of class that are called processes. And so, well, like this planting process. And so basically a process is everything that is time bound and has a date. And for each process, you will find a list of what we call participants. And participant can be a tool, or it can be also inputs, materials that you will add to the field, like fertilizer, pesticides. And it's also linked to different techniques to perform this process. So using this process class, you can describe everything that is happening in your field over time. So now I will deep dive into the ontology using a simplified view. So for example, here we have an agricultural experiment following a design. Here it's a completely randomized design. And this agronomic experiment is occurring in an experimental plot that I just mentioned before. And then the some management practices happen. So basically the processes. Here it's an agronomic fertilization process. And this process has participants. Here it's the implement or the tool. It's a broadcast spreader. And also this process is applying some inputs. Here it's limestone. And you can see that this term is not from the agronomy ontology, it's coming from ENVO. And what is important to know about the process, what is important to know in this process is how much limestone we'll need to add to. And so for that, we need to create organic fertilizer amount. And to create this term, we need to import the term PATO amount, and we also need to link it to the kilogram per hectare term from the unit ontology. And so this is how we link agronomic specific terms to external terms. So here is a quick overview of the terms that you can find in Agro. So you will find term about the agronomic, experiment. You also find term about the processes like the irrigation, the fertilization, the harvest. You have a list of the tools that you can find, and also a list of implements, so, of inputs. So here the fertilizer. We have around 1,600 terms in the ontology. So I invite you to browse the ontology either on OLS or on the Agronomy Ontology webpage to have a better idea of all the content. So in terms of maintenance, we follow the OPO foundry principles. The ontology is open and reuse, and we are reusing terms from relevant ontologies to avoid overlapping. And it's version in addition, yes, to the ontology development kits to import terms from external ontology and to make release. And the ontology is published in GitHub, where you can find the issue tracker and ask for a new term. We always welcome feedback, and we are happy to take new suggestions. And so finally, I would like to thank all the people that have contributed to Agro, and it was extremely valuable. And thank you for your attention, and I hope now you have a better idea of what you can find in the Agronomy Ontology and how it's linked to the other ontologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Celine. We now have a break. We will be reconvening at 14:10 UTC in about 10 minutes. Please stretch your limb, get a cup of coffee, have a bathroom break, and bring your questions, comments, and conversations. Thank you.
What's the program at the moment?
It's we're on a break for about
yeah. Okay. Okay, then fine. You can pause the recording if you want, or just let it.
Right.
People want to ask. It's also listed in the chat. If you agree, I'm just going to open up with a direct question to Damion. So one of the questions that I have is, within FoodOn, you have a crop, you have prepared products, which is, let's for example, say an omelet, and then you'll have a product, which is perhaps pancakes mix that you'll buy from the store. Are there any corner cases where there's a collision between these three different things, and there are fundamental incompatibilities that you haven't been able to address?
I certainly run into semantic problems trying to define some stuff, and mull over things, but cases don't come to mind in that regard at the moment. What I can say is the food products, there's been a little bit of a change in the modeling. We have a single component, basically, organism food product branch, which is supposed to just have the foods that are almost not at all processed or are minimally processed, but just contain one food item. The problematic area is that we also want to have a multi-component food area that has more than one ingredient, and that's kind of easier when you've got like lasagna that clearly has different ingredients. But if you have a can of beans, is it a multi-component food? Well, it has salt in it, and it has water added to it. So is that enough to make it a multi-component food? So we're kind of lofting a little bit there, that being migrating a number of foods over to the multi-component area, and perhaps not something that has water added or salt, but vinegar. So that's the area actually I'm all over. So you're going to see when you go to the organismal food source of FoodOn, you're going to see some products still that haven't been moved over to multi-component area.
Okay, this discussion is supposed to be free form. I can read questions from the document, or you can add them, or you can jump in and ask your own questions. Please don't be shy. We're relatively reasonably sized groups, so we should not have too many collision over the talk.
Right. I was going to add one other thing. We're going to start up a FoodOn curation group. And so this, at the moment, term requests have been coming in to us from GitHub and from partner projects. But we'll be starting probably a bi-weekly curation group and providing training so that these decisions aren't just happening within the Hsiao lab.
So moving along, Damion, I have a question from GBM here. What do you think about using machine learning as a tool to expand technologies?
Yeah, so I'm really I'm interested in the possibility that machine learning can be used, first of all, to suggest membership in ontological classes of entities, and thereby filling out classes of terms. The machine learning world is sort of the world of real world probabilistic data, whereas ontologies are the world of formal logic and reasoners that either are satisfiable or not. So when ontologists try to add a new category to a parent category, they're using the Aristotelian definition of a blank is a blank, which has a blankety blankety blank, and that expression needs to show up in OWL logic very discreetly. And I think it's sort of a bridge that humans can sort of understand that logic. So machine learning needs to deliver at least a suggestion platform for expressing class membership that way. But I think there are lots of other opportunities for machine learning, and there are other folks on the call here who are doing work in that. If Tarini happens to be listening, she could have some things to say.
Yeah, actually, some of the very early work was to create knowledge bases, and this is used a lot in to answer web queries. So there's a lot of relationships that end over time and that keep growing. And these are relations like, you know, who was the president of which country, and stuff like that, the kind of stuff that we sometimes search on. And so machine learning techniques for growing knowledge bases started with web applications. When it comes to extending these methods to domain ontologies, one of the there's a few different problems. One of them is having access to text corpuses that you can learn certain relationships from, like you know, orange is a fruit. And this is quite, I'm giving a very, very simple example, but you need corpuses that you can start learning domain relationships from. And also there's a lot of ambiguity of terms, like apple is a fruit, but apple is also a technology. And so you can use machine learning to automatically fit instance data into an ontology. But there is no automated evaluation. It will still have to be manual verification. So it's probably a tool to make a manual job easier. But this will have to be done for a very long time before these methods can become so robust that they have a precision of, you know, 80 or 90%. So that's all I have to say. So it is possible, but it is a growing field, and human evaluation is still necessary.
Do we have anyone else on the call who's been experimenting with machine learning and ontology and data set? Especially, I guess, if there's one other thing, which is the fair data folks have been outing I can drop a link to a video about this. They've been touting a nano publication format for expressing data that's for or against some hypothesis. And so that's the other area I'm interested in. Say we've tagged data sets with food-related terms. Can we now use machine learning to go out and find hypothesis and evidence supporting or denying them? So I sort of view the ontologist's role, if machine learning isn't helping ontologists actually provide the lexicon for data description, then perhaps machine learning is still helping us cope with the volume of data and using hypothesis testing engines to look at these nano publications that are encapsulating the data sets out there in food-related data.
Lauren, you've raised your hand. Please come up. Go ahead.
Hi. I just wanted to make a comment on the machine learning. So the Plantiome is, I didn't have time to cover this in our talk today, but the Plantiome is actually working on a machine learning project currently where we're working with a group and training the computer to recognize leaf shapes. And so the idea is that we're going to bring in images of different plant leaves, and hopefully the machine, the computer, will be smart enough at that point, after we get a big enough training set, to recognize the types of leaves and hopefully categorize them. And our goal down the road for this is probably to be able to assess disease symptoms. So I think I'm not sure about expanding ontologies, but it's definitely a way to utilize ontologies, I believe.
Anne, you've raised your hand.
Hi, yeah, so I was involved in a project that used machine learning to try to expand ontologies, and it was a little bit of a frustrating experience, actually. And I'm not sure if that was because of the technology or if it was because of the difficulty in finding postdocs with these sorts of technical skills. You know, it's very hard to find people who can do this and who are willing to be a postdoc instead of just going to work for Google or something. So that was the first point of frustration. The second is just getting the quality annotated training and test data. That sucked up so much of our project's time. But I am a little bit of a glutton for punishment, so I'm willing to maybe give it another try if we can avoid some of the pitfalls that my other project had.
Lee, would you like to respond or to bring up another point?
Oh, I was going to expand. Anne is also works with us and the Monarch group, as do I think a few other people who are here. We do use machine learning. My experiences with the human phenotype ontology and to try to identify similarities between diseases and possibly identify a potential mutation linkage between the disease phenotypes. And we also bridge different phenotypes between different model organisms and humans. That said, to expand ontologies, I have not been doing that with my own ontology, but we have been doing text mining and data mining tools to try to identify terms or make annotations between my ontology, which is medical action ontology, and disease ontology. But yes, it takes a lot of work and a lot of knowledge, both of ontologies, but then just domain knowledge as well.
Now, I have to say, anybody that terms their ontology project Monarch is a very cool name. It sounds like a James Bond villain. Anne, you're next.
Yeah, so just as a point of clarification, the project that I was talking about was about using machine learning to read text in order to expand ontologies, whereas the machine learning that Lee was just talking about is more about looking at other ontologies and other types of structured data to expand other ontologies. So I feel like that, while it's still a lot of work and still requires some degree of checking to make sure things went right, it's far more tractable than the NLP solutions that we were trying to come up with.
Okay. Just on to a second question that I had here in nutritional data on project packaging is targeted at consumers, and as such, it's occasionally oversimplified, whereas a lot of the professional vocabulary tend to be extremely specific and well designed. And have you seen an alignment problem in between those two?
Yep. So Lily here. Yes, actually, so we started the project as well with the purpose of provide simple terminologies, because sometimes the terminologies that are used, for example, for I don't know, specialists are more sometimes related to the chemical name rather than sometimes or even sometimes not related to the actual function of the dietary component. And so we actually saw that when we were matching or mapping the terminologies that we have or from data, available data or existing resources to KEBI, which actually contains very specific and biochemical terminologies. So sometimes even as a biologist, we don't really understand the name of that specific component. So in CDNO, what we are trying to do is to use the semantic equivalent terms, but actually use synonyms that are more like simple to use than in the way that they are actually named in KEBI. So yeah, and we are actually in the nutritional framework that we have, we are actually using the basic biomolecules, which are carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, vitamins. So with the actual simple terms, so we actually can map, for example, just total carbohydrates, total proteins, or total lipids, which is what is actually required in packages or yeah, like different that are targeted more for like consumers rather than just nutritionists or, for example, I don't know, breeders that can probably know a little bit more about what they are looking for, as well for secondary metabolites that can be added as well. Yeah, but like I think the synonyms are actually really the answer. Like we are trying to actually use synonyms that are more simple, that make it more simple than actually just reusing the name or the terminology that is described in KEBI. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's my answer.
Anders, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, I don't know if you probably have more comments about it.
All right, Anders.
Yes, sorry. I'm from the food composition world. And in the food composition world, we could not use KEBI because most nutrients are not chemical entities. They are mixtures of chemical components. Furthermore, the nutrients in foods are, or the amount of nutrients you find in foods is dependent on the method of analysis in many cases, and therefore you need to have both the nutrient name and the method it was determined with in order to have a good value, if you can, or a good documentation. So in the European and in the world food composition data, we use either in-foods tag names or in-food component identifiers, or the similar Eurofer component identifiers, which we have defined in Europe for the nutrients. And the difference between in-foods and Eurofer component identifiers is that in-foods include the method of analysis in their tag names, whereas we keep the method of analysis and nutrient apart in the Eurofer thesauri.
Yeah. So I think what we are trying to do is actually just reuse the simple terminology from KEBI, but then trying to create a specific axiom that can actually help us to describe in a better way the concept that we are trying to represent. So it's not only just about the nutrient, but it's also like about the whole axiom that is that we are actually creating. But as I mentioned before, we also have some, and like I think I agree with you. Like it can be as well depending on like which method do you use. So that's why we initially were trying to create 3 different classes for the CDNO. So it was the nutritional composition, dietary function, and analytical method. So yeah, so I think will be also like just used in in another class that will help to relate and represent that knowledge, and that are actually that can be represented together with the function and the method as well.
I'll note that the CDNO folks have been making some effort to map over the nutrients to the in-foods tags that appear to be the appropriate link. But that was leaving aside the more analytic in-foods tags. So there's more work to do there to make sure the ontology world is matching the analytic, the existing analytic tags that are known.
Yep.
The next question is for Laurel Cooper from Francesco. And quickly browsing the Pantheon homepage, I see that there are ontology terms and bioentities. I suppose that bioentities are entries in the database rather than the ontology part. Is it possible to handle genes and or pathways in an ontology framework without using databases?
So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Warren, okay, thank you. So I put an answer on the document there. Yes, the bioentities are the data objects that are in the database. So let's see what else. Okay, yeah. Right, yeah, so the bioentities are data objects that we've annotated with an ontology term. And then the second part of the question, is it possible to handle genes and pathways in an ontology framework? I'm not sure about how that would work. If you, I think behind most of these platforms, there is some sort of a database. There's lots of different kinds of databases. So, and I'm not sure exactly what you mean by handle. Does that mean annotate them? Because of course, you know, you can tag data objects with ontology terms. And I guess they could be imported, these entities could be imported into the ontology as instances. But I don't know if that's really the best way to deal with them. And I think there was actually a question above this too, from our HW.
Yeah, that's me. I was trying.
Oh, that's you.
to generate interest. Just leaving Francesco take the stage.
Okay,
Francesco,
I'm sorry,
would you
your audio kind of cut out there. What was that, Rob?
Okay, can you hear me? Maybe I could explain
Yes.
maybe a little better what I was asking. Let's say I'm working in the field of metagenomics, and I'm always struggling to understand how to represent, let's say, the results, so the genes and eventually the pathways. So the results of an assay, of a metagenomic assay into ontology. So that was the basis of the question, let's say, because we have an ontology developed, an ontology, but we are far away from databases. So I would like to, let's say, use the ontology to do some pathway and genes analysis. For example, if I can store the pathways or genes in a sample, in a food matrix, let's say, and compare to other to understand what are the microbes doing and what transformation are doing on the food. This is, let's say, the what's behind the question.
I see, yeah. Perhaps other folks on the call have some experience in dealing with this, perhaps integrating the data objects right in the ontology as an instance, or anyone else would like to comment on that?
So I can certainly rant about that topic. That one of my concerns about a lot of ontologies out there is that we've created an ontology, there is no instance data, and everybody walks away with mission accomplished. But there is a second problem, which is to say, we have a representation of a logical universe in an ontology. Now, how do we fit instance data from the field into it?
Right.
And that's a secondary problem that somebody needs to really document. I don't think that we're doing as good of a job generally as we should be in order to make this usable from a field perspective. It's okay to disagree with me, folks. I'm just a chair.
Yeah, that's all right. I appreciate your comment.
I'll just chime in. This is Ramona Walls. Just saying that, in answer to the question, there are many ways that one could represent all kinds of entities in an ontology, but I think Robert's point is that without instance data, without some kind of database, whether it's a relational database or NoSQL or a graph database, if you don't bring in the actual data, then what is your ontology really doing? So it's hard to imagine a very useful application that doesn't store data in some way or another.
Right.
And the way that the Plantiome does it is one very, very useful way of doing it. It's very similar to the way that the gene ontology does it, but there are, of course, dozens of other ways that it can be done as well.
All right, let me move on to a question for Cillian from Damion. Where does agro leave off in terms of post-harvest agronomy? I see storage process, for example, which could cover farm on-site storage for crop. We're wondering in FoodOn which terms to send your way about post-harvest.
Yeah, that's a good question, Damion. So yes, basically it's defining boundaries of the agronomy ontology and defining boundaries of the agronomy domain. Where do we stop? So we have built the agronomy ontology with the view of the researchers. So basically the experiment stopped after the harvest, and then there is the processing of the harvest product to analyze it. But then in a classic farm, well, post-harvest process depends on who will be the consumer of the product. I guess if it's the animals from the farm, it might be part of the agronomy ontology or maybe more a livestock ontology. But then it's also a matter of defining when the food processing starts. So, well, maybe Meda, you want to add something to my answer?
Sure. I mean, I think, hi, everybody. This is Meda, and I work with Cillian on this project. And I am an agronomist, so I kind of take a look at this from the researcher point of view as well as a tool that will, that's making use of the standards that we need to make use of. But I think Celine covered it pretty well. What I was just looking at the document and seeing that you have drying, storage, and then you have processing and primary processing, and it's not clear to me what you mean. To me, when I think about processing and where the agronomy ontology might end, I would see, for instance, if you're talking about a cereal like rice or wheat, I would end the ontology with the actual threshing. and you know, talk a little bit about the storage of the threshed product, for instance. In that case, I wouldn't go any further than that. So I'm not quite sure. So when you're talking, for instance, with rice, you could do much more. After you thresh it, you then soak it, you pound it. That's not something that we would prefer to be, or let me phrase it another way, prefer not to be handling those kinds of terms. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that does. Like, just in farm practice, grains are stored on farm. Behind the question is this whole landscape of sampling of food for nutritional content, pre and post harvest. So I know the CDNO folks are interested in sampling post harvest. So we're just trying to come up with the terms that are hidden away in there. And it's not just pre harvest and post harvest. There's also storage.
Absolutely, yeah.
So on. After a year, they've been sitting around. But I think your delineation, it sounds fairly simple. So that's good. I mean, well, I like a clear boundary.
Yeah, and I think you know, another example that occurs to me that may be of direct relevance to you is something like aflatoxin in maize, for instance, and the level of aflatoxin is pretty well determined, or can be associated with how that maize is stored. And so there, I think, you know, where we would end is just with the storage methods, perhaps the storage, you know, the storage techniques rather, and then, you know, perhaps that would be of relevance to you, so you could draw on agro for a particular term, but then the rest of that pipeline essentially would probably be your domain. That's how I'm seeing it. But we can certainly talk more about this, you know, and go have a little bit more of a back and forth of after this meeting.
Yeah,
determined by particular use cases, I think.
Right. FoodOn, initially, it was just going to be about food products, describing them for epidemiology. But now, now we're going further back into the supply chain of distribution and manufacturing and so on. So, yeah. Okay. Good. If you're talking, Warren, you're muted. Now I see you're not muted, but we're still not hearing you. If you are talking.
You're giving me the floor, Damion. It's
you're. Yeah. Yes, Elizabeth. Sure, go for it.
I'm sorry. I saw the pop-up window saying that you're trying to open my mic. So. Okay, I raised my hand because on that part of the discussion, I think the agronomy ontology has its boundaries, indeed. What I wanted just to mention is the post-harvest qualities are very important for also the crop improvement. So in the crop ontology, you can find some description of the, shelf life, all that, also some qualities for processing into food products. Of course, we are targeting more a certain type of products related to our research in tropical and subtropical area, but we have per crop a list of quality traits which encompass some of the post-harvest traits and the processing traits. We are also working with a new project with food scientists, and we are now discussing developing at least two ontologies, and we are looking at FoodOn, and we're looking at other ontologies as necessary. And one is to describe the value chain you just have on your drawing, and have a description of what we call the market segment. So the farmers, the local processors, industrial processors, traders, consumers. And so we would like to have a clear definition of those market segments and be able to link that back to the preferred trade per value chain stages you have in the drawing in this document. So in fact, it's a complementary work we are launching at the moment. It's very, very new, so we are not very far. And we are also collecting processing techniques for those food products. So we are moving out from the crop itself, and we are now just trying to find ways of describing the food products for this type of crops.
Okay, that brings up one other point, which is, I can't remember whether it was agro or crop. I was looking at traits to describe a crop by, but it wasn't an experimental plot. It was actually just, it would be in the course of a regular farm. But the sense of experiment, agricultural experiment, was sort of baked into a lot of the terms. And so I was wondering if you see a need to have a parallel vocabulary for regular farming practice that's outside of the experimental context.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, it's still actually just describing all the same kind of traits. Treatments. It's just that the treatment itself wasn't done in an experimental context. So something to consider, and maybe I'll follow up with you. I just didn't want to have a whole parallel set of terms that were kind of talking about exactly the same thing, but outside of the experimental context.
Yeah, we are facing the same the same issue with when we are dealing with data coming from consumer surveys. It's not really experimental; it's more collecting what the answers are. So it's outside the real experiment or with any treatment. So same kind of, yeah. So I think we could discuss this with FoodOn at least. So if we start defining and describing our food products, we are aligned with what you have at least, or we connect. That would be
okay. And I presume CDNO will be a factor too. If well, it depends. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll take more. Continue this offline. Thanks. Okay. And so we are, I think, at the bottom of the question list. Robert, do you have anything else to talk about? Otherwise, we should open it to the floor to anyone else who's.
I'm sorry, I seem to be having problems with my microphone.
We hear you now.
Last comment that I'd like to make to this discussion is that the delineation between the farm and the processing is very important, in that a lot of on-farm cleaning gets done of the crop. And it's not uncommon to have 10 or 20% of your harvest just be stone and other non-crop elements. So from the agronomy perspective, if you're trying to do yield analysis, that initial crop cleaning is very important, because you're losing a lot of what you think is your yield, but is actually non-consumables. And from going to the food product, that influences a lot of quality of the crop that's being put into that food processing, and what additional processing is going to be done to it to clean it up.
Yeah, I can actually echo there. So Graham King of Southern Cross University told me what to somebody who does not know agronomy was kind of shocking, which is that there are a number of farms where 30% of the carrot crop is actually left to waste or compost right on the farm because it's not up to grade. So what I didn't really explore in FoodOn so far is this whole grading process, this on-farm grading, and then all of the other choices for grading all the way up to industrial processing of food. And from a sustainability perspective, it sounds to me like we really need to develop or echo the existing language that's around that in ontology. Now, maybe that's not quite in FoodOn, or maybe it is because there isn't a curation group that's specialized in that particular area. And if that's the case, then FoodOn will take on those kind of terms. So that's the other reason I'm interested in this.
All right. I believe we've exhausted all of the questions that are on paper here. Anybody in with another question which has not been written down? Don't be shy. You aren't being graded on this.
Damion, did you see my response to your question? I know you're leading the discussion, so you had asked about the names on the
Right.
CO terms.
Right. Yes. Yes.
So that's maybe a bigger question for Elizabeth. But when we at Plantium, this is Laurel speaking. At Plantium, when we import the crop ontology vocabularies into Plantium, we append the term name with the crop name. And I think that's what you were asking. I wasn't super clear.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
exactly what I'm asking. So just for the audience, there's a little bit of an issue I was just asking Laurel about, which is when you go to OLS to look up plant crop traits for particular crops, but you don't know which crop, you're just looking for a trait. You get back a whole bunch of traits, but you can't tell which crop ontology is involved in it. So it's a guessing game, and you have to click on each one to finally find the wheat. But it sounds like
you need to know. You probably need to know the prefix numbers, what crop they, because the. So could you click on the link that I put in the chat since you're sharing your screen?
I did.
Or Warren.
Oh, that's Warren who is Warren.
Here,
Yeah.
Let me share it with Warren.
Right.
I can just comment that the name of the crop is in the display of the OLS. So you can select if you want maize or rice.
So the issue was when people are searching in OLS, we're confronted with, this is more just a side tech discussion, but
right. It's kind of an interesting thing, though. It's interesting to hear how other people are viewing these things.
Right.
Yeah. Let me put this for everyone. So I put a link in the chat to one of the terms at Plantium, and the other thing, if you have the code, the ID, that encodes the crop name.
Yeah, I get it.
Right.
This is
yeah.
a thing. So I'll share my screen so people know what I'm talking.
Yeah. This is probably interesting for everyone too. So not just.
Right.
And that's something that we thought about at Plantium too. Yeah. So when I look at this, I think, oh, CO 321, that's wheat. CO 322 is maize.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
so those,
world does not know a thing about that.
Yeah.
So in our brains. And the other issue is that if you do search for grain iron content, you're only getting one back for some reason in the OLS system, and you're not getting anything back in OntoB. So what you just showed me, Laurel, was neat in that I'm seeing the actual name of the grain in front. And so now I'm puzzled about why that wouldn't show up here in OLS unless they're looking at a different version of this.
Well, yeah. So they're at OLS. They're pulling in the CO vocabularies before we've processed them for Plantium. So could you click on the link? Could you click on the link in the chat, and I can just show you how it looks different.
Right.
Or I can share if you want.
Sure, you take the show.
Sure, I'll do that. Okay. So I didn't cover all the details on this, but let's see, here we go. So in a comparison to that term that you just saw, the ALS, which is the same term, it's the CO 321 222 grain iron content. When we import these vocabularies into Plantium, we append the term name with the crop name at the beginning, and then the, I'm not sure what you would call this, the aspect maybe at the end, because the CO vocabularies have the trait, they have the method, they have the scale, and then all that is combined into the variable. So when we import those, we append the names with whether it's a trait, a method, a scale, or a variable. Mm-hmm. And so if you look down here, you can see below this green iron content trait is the variable term. And the reason why the name looks a little bit weird, because it's an abbreviation of the parts that are in there. So it's grain iron. It's not a typo. And behind this is the method and the scale that the breeders use to measure that. So yeah, that's definitely something to think about about the way it's done at OLS.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But if I may?
Sure, Elizabeth, thank you.
Laurel, thank you. I think in the Plantium, it's clear you have imported the crop as a prefix, which is great. In the OLS, in fact, I know Marie-Angélique is in touch with the OLS team. And the fact is, when you search your term, you can see on the main window the crop ontology. So you see it's for wheat, maize, and then you can click on the term, and then you will have the display of the crop-specific ontology. So I suppose the idea was to not perhaps duplicate, have a wheat grain iron content, because, yeah. So normally,
yeah, so here's all the different ones, yeah.
Barley, and then you can select from this list and not from the pick list. But if you feel it's a problem, then perhaps we can work with the OLS to provide the crop as a prefix to the trait itself. So if you click on grain iron content, you will see
this one, yeah, and it does, yeah, it does show
wheat.
Mm-hmm.
So if you duplicate by adding wheat as a prefix, you have to duplicate it at the.
Yeah.
We can
right.
Yeah. So it's just different.
I'll just
go ahead.
Like similar problems are cropping up in other ontologies. Whenever you're getting a whole bunch of ontologies using the same term,
oh yes,
was notorious in Obo Foundry. There's at least 13 versions of patient. So what I'm advocating for is that if a label actually has some kind of material difference from some other label, or that it actually include indication of that in the label itself of the term.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a side thing. We should just
you know the best example of that problem with the names is the NCBI taxonomy. They have a term root, and that really confuses our browser. Because I think now I think they've fixed the name. I think it's called like NCBI root now, but for a long time, in Protege, you'd look for root, and I would get the NCBI term, and I'm like, this is strange. What's going on here? But definitely something to think about. And I also wanted to say that I'm really excited about this trend with using ontologies to describe food, and we'd love to integrate some of your food ontology into Plantium, since we're linking with you, and yeah, maybe in the next few years or something if we get funded again. Yeah, it's really nice.
This brings up one other subject which has been kicked around, which is a key subject that not really involved in yet, but we're looking to the plant biology folks for solutions, which is subspecies level varietals of plants, of which there are like hundreds and hundreds of wine and grape and apple, grape and apple varieties, and the nomenclature around that, which hasn't made it into ontology really. So, for example, we've just got a handful of different apple varieties that, whereas I'm intimidated by the fact that Wikipedia lists about 900 apple varieties.
Yeah.
So we want to be able to
just try working on wheat.
Yeah, right. Same thing. So there could be a whole workshop on the topic of subspecies nomenclature.
Yeah,
Jessica and I have been putting out a ontology on wheat varietals specifically. The major ontological problem is that it's based on primarily registration and breeders' rights within certain jurisdictions. So building a picture that is portable from one place to another is requiring a little bit more ontological complexity that I would rather have.
Interesting.
And so right now we do have a text mining project that is bootstrapping to try and create a lot more definitions for, well, nobody really knows what AAC Eurostar actually means unless you're in specifically that business.
Right.
And even though the farmer may be using that, by the time it gets to the processor, all they know is that it's durum wheat. And there's a lot of opportunity there for translation and for identification.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's we've run across at Grain Genes as well, is a lot of the germplasm names and the species names are changing and they're used differently in different places, and it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, can I say something there? That no, for plant genetic resources, this is an issue, and I think it's been partially addressed in the association of DOIs with individual accessions within plant genetic resource collections. So there will be distributions of different cultivars which are stored there, but that's a separate world from commerce and production of wheat, where people are growing different varieties. But from a genetics point of view, even those individual cultivars and accessions within a gene bank drift as they're regenerated. So ultimately, the only identifier is the DNA sequence. And it's something within the genetic resource community and within DivSeq we're discussing at the moment is how do we start approaching this to have some formalization that could be used not only in genetic resources, but through the pipeline where people are using different cultivars. Because most of the research data in the world are at this very specific level of what we call a genotype.
I have to agree with you. There's a big gap in between what happens operationally on farms and what researchers are doing. And at the end of the day, what happens is somebody says, you know, this bin contains X, and we take that for granted. And that gets completely separated from what it actually is. And it makes it very difficult to transport that real world data into the experimental and statistical realm. So at some point, we need to find a way to crosswalk the data while accounting to the fact that when you have 1,500 bushels of wheat, there's going to be one kernel that's not what you think it is.
Sure. It's not only just for experimental data, it's about trade as well. Someone's claiming that they're selling you a variety of, I don't know, let's say a red delicious apple, and it isn't, then there's a problem when you're selling it. And when people are grading horticultural crops especially, the cultivar can be quite important in terms of what's the value proposition for buying that particular cultivar. So being able to have a method of verifying and tracing for traceability and some structured vocabulary for and labels, identifiers, unique identifiers, I think is something which would transition between the world of food and consumption and production and research and breeding. So if someone could, groups of people could start to tackle that problem, I think there'd be a huge benefits.
So Graham, I don't want to steal Jessica's thunder. She will be talking about that in a few weeks, but I agree. And there's monstrosities like harmonized systems, which everybody uses for trade, but don't actually tell you what it is, which make that problem even more complicated. All right, so we have about 5 minutes before our session ends. Would anybody like to bring up another topic before we close?
Just a note to Tarini, if you're on the call, maybe you just want to give people a heads up about this experience, this taste experience that we have in store in the workshop.
Sure. I think next week I'm going to talk about it a little bit more. But yeah, I could say something now. So the idea was to, we're talking so much about food, and the idea was to taste food as well in the conference. And obviously this is a much better experience when it's happening at a physical location. But since it's not, we thought to make it possible anyway. And so the idea is you will be provided with a set of instructions to obtain your samples. And what the objective of this is to compare samples that have been made from different ingredients and they have different nutrition profiles, and to associate your hedonistic response, which is whether you like it or not, or your sensory response, what the texture is, what the taste is, what the smell is. So to associate your sensory response to the nutrition content. And when we present the results, it'd be very interesting to see whether there was any correlation. Do people tend to like things that taste a certain way and nutritionally are also more healthy, which the exercise will explain what this means.
Okay.
Also, what's very interesting, because this is now, which is now online, is to not make it seem like this was a compromise that we have to do this online anyway, but the procedure by which you procure your samples, it'd be very interesting to see if that influences your sensory outcome in any way.
So I guess my question is that the whole experience does involve us cooking stuff, right?
Yes, I didn't explain the process of obtaining your samples, but there
okay. So all I want to know is, do we need a bit more heads up about the ingredients we should go shop for and to before, or will there be plenty of time to get the ingredients lined up for it?
I don't think ingredients will be that difficult to obtain, and there's a number of substitutes. So, but there will be a recipe, there'll be a video showing you how to make it, because you might want to know what the consistency is or how you should chop something. But I don't think the ingredients will be that hard. The presentation is next week at the same time. And before that, well before that, by the weekend, all the participants should have detailed instructions.
Okay, great. So just to say, folks, we're really looking forward to tapping into your mind and your taste buds in this workshop, like no other ICBO workshop can.
Sounds wonderful.
Thank you for the advert, Damion.
So there's going to be an email about that then for next week.
Yes.
Yes.
I will send an email with all instructions by the weekend, and the presentations next week. And then you have a week to do the exercise, and then I'll analyze the results and present it at the end of the conference.
Oh,
All right, folks, this is all the time that we have. Thank you for your time, and thank you to the presenters for outstanding work. I look forward to the next session next week.
Great. Thank you, Robert, for hosting.
yeah. Thanks for thanks for hosting, and thanks to the audience as well, and thanks to the other presenters.
Mhm.